we were discussing chapter 5, and we've discussed the various goals. We discussed 4 goals. Two of the goals are supposed to be tested in the AS exam, which is number one is price stability, and the second one is basically balance of payment. Price stability is your keeping inflation low, and balance of payment is basically your current account should be not in a deficit for a long time. We talked about this in detail on a class on Saturday. We talked about the causes of why deficit happen, and then we talked about also the consequences of a deficit. And then in the policy section, we talked about, like what are the various sort of policies. And so I talked about two kinds of policies. The first policy was what we call expenditure switching policy, which was basically import controls and devaluation. Here we talked about how when you put import controls or devalue your currency, your X minus M can go up. Remember, we want the current account deficit to disappear. The second kind of policies, which are discussion for today, is what we call expenditure dampening policies. These are the policies which we'll soon see are also called the demand side policies. Okay, they call demand side policies. So today's discussion would be on fiscal and monetary policy, and we'll talk about how these policies are good or bad. Let's talk about this. Let's start. So when we look at basically expenditure dampening policies, these policies are designed to make sure that there is an overall reduction in the expenditure. And even on imports. So you want to reduce expenditure overall so that imports go down, so that X minus M goes up. Okay, so that's the goal. You want the X minus M to go up, and that's why you want your expenditure, what we call dampening policies to happen. Do you guys get that? Does that make sense? So they're also called expenditure reducing policies because you're trying to reduce expenditure or dampen expenditure, and you're basically making the AD curve shift to the left. Now, guys, what's the logic behind that? Well, basically, the idea is that if AD falls, incomes fall. And since imported goods have or have an elastic, have an income sort of income elastic demand, when the income go up, people buy more of it, you will see imports expenditure will go down. So when you are trying to cut down expenditure, so if this occurs, expenditure on all goods and services should fall. And since this would include expenditure on imports, the current account deficit should go up, right? You will see current account deficit to go up. Also, because domestic producers, now this is an important thing to understand, if the domestic producers are finding that the domestic market is dampening, it's not strong enough, then they may focus on selling goods abroad and exports may go up. So they may try to make up for the decrease in domestic sales with increase in sales abroad, and that's basically kind of altering the AD. So both the fiscal and monetary policies are also called demand side policies that we are going to use. Why? Because they will be making AD fall. Make sense? Is there any question about this? How does it work? I'm going to talk about this in 1 minute, but do we understand what expenditure dampening policy is? Is there any question about it? Yep, are we good to move on, Wasif and everyone, Ryan? People in the class, are we good to move on? Okay, so guys, two kinds of policy we look at. One is what we call fiscal and monetary policy. So I'm going to look at this now here. Let's write expenditure dampening policies. So there's fiscal policy and then there is monetary policy. So The policy that we're going to use is basically, I want to first explain what fiscal monetary policy is. So fiscal policy basically means you are changing two variables. Either you change G or you change T. By monetary policy is basically we change money supply that can change interest rates. Okay, and both G and T can change AD, and similarly money supply change can also change AD. How do we do that? We'll talk about this now. So remember guys, if for example government wants the AD, if the government wants the AD to go up, what can they do? Well, they can make the government expenditure to go up, or they can make the taxation to go down, right? This is called, what do we call this? This is called expansionary fiscal policy. Why do we call it expansionary fiscal policy? We call it expansionary fiscal policy because you are trying to make AD go up, and this expansionary fiscal policy will make, because AD will go up, of course GDP will go up, right? Now, uh, if your goal was opposite, if your goal was basically to make AD go down, what will you do? You make the government expenditure go down or taxation go up. When you make the taxation go up, guys, remember what happens as a result of that? And the answer is, if you make the taxation go up, you will be able to see your disposable income to go down. So I was talking about if the AD goes down, government expenditure goes up. If you want the AD to go down, you need to make the government expenditure go down or taxation to go up. If you want the AD to go up, you want the government expenditure to go up or taxation to go down. Your AD going down means it's a contractionary fiscal policy. Do we get that? So expansionary fiscal policy will make the AD go up. Contractionary fiscal policy will make the AD go down. And when the AD go up, of course, you will see inflation to happen. And we sort of also move on to talk about this. So if your goal is to basically control the inflation, if this is my AD naught, guys, and AS naught, if you want to control the inflation, you want the AD to go down, right? So the way to go about this is what we do is we do what we call contractionary fiscal policy. The contractionary fiscal policy will make the GDP to go down, but also price level to go down. The reason why I'm discussing this right now is because for your X minus M to improve, in order for your X minus M to improve, what we are trying to do is we want the import to go down by making AD fall. And when AD falls, income falls. And when income falls, we are hoping imports will fall. Okay, so that's your goal. But this goal can also achieve in controlling inflation. So if your goal is to make imports go down uh, and control inflation, both are happening here, because this can also help us control demand pull inflation, and also can make X minus M to go up. Okay, so this is what we call contractionary fiscal policy. Make sense, guys? Any question about this one? Yes, we'll talk about the real GDP will go down. The problem is this, that the real GDP will go down, and while this policy seems to be like uh, good, but the problem is this, that the downside of this is that you may see GDP to fall, which means there is a, we can talk about this, there is a conflict here with other goals. What are the other goals? The economic growth which is that GDP is going down. And number two, it's conflicting with unemployment or full employment. So full employment, or another word for aside, unemployment to go up. Got it? So this is a problem of what we call contractionary fiscal policy that is causing AD to fall. Make sense? Are we good? Now I want to go quickly to talk about monetary policy. Guys, if we want the AD to go up, we would want to increase money supply, because when the money supply go up, we know this interest rate will fall. And when interest rate falls, consumption will go up, investment will go up, and therefore GDP will go up. Yeah. Also, guys, remember when interest rate falls, what happens to hot money? Hot money flows out, and exchange rate will fall, which in turn would mean exports will become cheaper, imports will become expensive, and even expense will go up. Okay, so uh, in fact, let me not discuss this part of the thing because that will be confusing. But let's look at this one. So AD goes down. If you want the AD to go up, you can make the CNI to go up through what we call expansionary monetary policy. Okay, but what if you want to make the AD go down? You make the money supply go down, causing interest rate to go up, which will cause consumption to fall, investment to fall, and therefore GDP to fall. Remember, why does consumption fall and investment fall? Because when the interest rate goes up, cost of borrowing is going up. Also, incentive to save goes up. So both consumption and investment to fall, and that basically means we are looking at contractionary fiscal policy. Got it? Does that make sense? Any questions about this, guys? Do we get the idea? Yes, yes. Remember, when the money supply is going up, the A2 of course is different in AS is different explanations. Amin. In AS, the explanation is that when the money supply goes up, people will have more money, so they will not be asking for loans anymore. There is more liquidity out there, and that extra liquidity would mean there will be a lower, what you call it, need to borrow, and that will make the interest rate go down. That's the AS explanation. In the A2, of course, we have a whole chapter, money supply and money demand chapter, which is a different story altogether. Yeah, but so guys, any question about this? So now, if I go back to this one, both the policies that we want to do is basically we want the AD to go down. So when you look at AD to go down, you would want basically contractionary fiscal and monetary policy, which means reduce G or increase D, which is fiscal, or reduce money supply so that interest rate goes up. So we want to do these policies. Okay, Zamin, did I answer your question? Okay, A2, of course, Zamin, it has a different explanation. We need to know that too. AS has a different explanation because we haven't done the monetary sector. Okay, guys, moving on to see. So fiscal policy is defined as a set of government policies relating to spending and taxation, direct taxes, and indirect taxes can be raised or lowered to alter government to alter the amount of disposable income. Governments use expansionary fiscal policy to increase AD, uh, and contractionary or deflationary fiscal policy towards contractionary or deflationary fiscal policy to reduce AD. If the government would like to discourage consumption, then it can increase income taxes to reduce disposable income. Okay, this is likely to sort of decrease and lower expenditure on imported goods. Also, government are responsible for imports, guys. If the government reduce their own imports, they will also make the expenditure import to be lower. So basically, fiscal policy may include government to cut down their expenditure on imports, so G goes down. At the same time, government is increasing taxes so that disposable income goes down, so that people have lower money available to be spent on foreign goods. Similarly, what is monetary policy? Monetary policy is defined as a set of official policies governing the supply of money in the economy and the level of interest rates. Changes in the central bank interest rate can affect the level of AD in the economy. To reduce AD, the central bank may increase the interest rate. How do they increase the interest rate? By lowering money supply. This ultimately increases the cost of borrowing and the incentive to save, and can lead to decrease in both consumption and investment. And that's known as what we call contractionary monetary policy. Make sense, guys? Any questions? Can we add A2 concepts in a 12-mark essay? Not necessarily. No, I don't think you should. Um, Not needed. Okay, guys, what's the evaluation of expenditure dampening policies? Um, let's try to cover this too. Any question before we move on? Okay, any questions, guys? Okay, so let's look at what are the evaluation. Number one, some countries have a high marginal propensity to import. So a lot of countries uh, who have, when the income go up, they buy more of imports. For those countries, when AD goes down, current account may go up significantly. So when your AD falls, your income falls, and then imports can go down. And if you are one of those countries where which has this kind of a tendency where they end up buying more imports. Pakistan, by the way, is that country where import expenditure is high, mainly because we buy, when income go up, we buy more imports than other countries. So that's a country problem with Pakistan. Number two, guys, deflationary policies will also put pressure on manufacturers to reduce costs, and this will lead to a more competitive exports, and so exports will increase. So we are also going to see this, that when you do, when the AD goes down, we are hoping that that will basically make the imports to go down, but also because domestic consumption is going down, you might see exports to go up as well. So this will put a pressure on the producers, and they may want to sort of increase expenditure. They may need to sort of focus more on exports rather than domestic market. Make sense? If you have a fixed exchange rate regime, guys, we said this, that if you have a fixed exchange rate regime, we use interest rates to manage exchange rate. Why? Because then interest rate can go up and down and hot money can flow in and out, right? But if you have a fixed exchange rate regime, monetary policy cannot be used to fix the current account deficit. Why? Because the monetary policy is trying to make the exchange rate to be balanced. This is because increasing interest rates in order to reduce the aggregate demand and attract inflows of financial capital that requires further adjustment to maintain the exchange rate, which means, in simple words, we're using interest rate to manage hot money, which is managing exchange rate. Hence, fiscal policy is the only way we can go about in a fixed exchange rate regime. Okay, guys, remember, in a fixed exchange rate regime, monetary policy is only geared to managing exchange rate, which means it's not available to manage anything else, like for example, economic growth or inflation or current account deficit. You can only use what we call fiscal policy. We've been discussing this for a lot longer now, that interest rates are used in a fixed exchange rate regime to manage your um, exchange rate, and that's why it's not a policy available for you to use for any other purpose. Also, under a floating exchange rate regime, the balance of payment we believe comes in automatically in balance. So policy intervention is not needed. Remember, the balance of payment may automatically balance, at least in theory. Uh, Unless the authorities are concerned if a large deficit on the current account is being offset by a large surplus in the financial accounts. Let's say every year you have a large current accounts deficit, and that is being funded by financial account surplus. Now, financial account surplus basically means foreigners are buying your assets like land, like for example, they're investing in your country and all that. And we believe such a surplus in the financial account it's not too healthy. Why? Because it's not sustainable in the long run, and secondly, you may lose your sovereignty. So there is, at that point in time, maybe if you are concerned about your deficit, you may need to intervene and try to fix it through expenditure dampening policy. The last point I think somebody was pointing out to me, and I said we'll talk about this, as Namin was asking me, that whenever you do expenditure dampening policy, they are not popular. Why? Because they conflict with other macroeconomic objectives. Because you're making AD to go down, you're also causing unemployment to go up. So from a policy perspective, guys, it's a very unpopular policy. Uh, and it's not desirable to have this policy. The deflationary effect on demand is why expenditure bonding policies, expenditure dampening policies are not desirable to adopt, and this as people suffer from unemployment. And that's exactly why, if you go back to this, guys, if you go back to one of the discussion I was happening, uh, why is the deficit a problem? And I said that a persistent deficit is also a problem if the government end up doing contractionary fiscal monetary policy, which can slow down the domestic economy. So we believe that whenever the government is doing expenditure dampening policy, probably they have no other option available, because the expenditure dampening policies are extremely unpopular. They can make unemployment go up, and they can make the GDP to go down. Make sense, guys? So that's the discussion that I wanted to have. That when you look at expenditure dampening policies, uh, they can be contractionary, or they can be expansionary. Contractionary will make the AD go down, and that can make the X minus M to go up. However, they are not so good to be followed, because they can make unemployment to go up. They are very unpopular. Governments can lose popularity when they do these kind of policies. But if you have no other option, then of course you might end up doing it. Make sense, guys? Also, we just discussed one more point, that in a fixed exchange rate regime, we may not be able to use expenditure dampening policy of monetary nature, but we can use it. You can use fiscal policy. Okay, guys. Which policies are the best to improve GDP? And the answer is supply side policies, which we will discuss later. Okay, we'll have supply side policies discussion, inshallah, on Wednesday, since Tuesday is a day off for us. Okay, that's the agenda for Wednesday. How much of the course? We have supply side policies, and then we have policies to correct inflation and deflation. So two discussions are left. So few pages. We're just wrapping it up. Okay, guys, that's it for today. Any other question before we end the class?